that I can't do it. It's riddled with self-doubt. I had every doctor that I ever met telling me I have some sort of ailment, some sort of anxiety, some sort of depression. In my health and wellness journey, helped me get into that dialogue because I found that a lot of the issues that were diagnosed as emotional or psychological were in fact physiological. Eating too much sugar, eating a lot of processed food, not moving your body, having super low testosterone, having very high estrogen, like not eating certain, like when all of those things started to calibrate through nutraceuticals, through clean eating, to moving my body, to calming my nervous system with meditation, all of a sudden this whole new world evolved, saying, oh, this is what's actually going on. And that transcendence, for lack of a better word, went into the business because the business was an extension of me.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur Podcast, filled with marketing and leadership tips on launching and growing your business with your host, Deanne Mora.
Welcome back to the show. Today's guest is Ari Rastegar, founder and CEO of Rastegar Property Company. He went from investing during law school and working jobs like pizza delivery and Johnny Rockets to building a real estate platform operating across 38 cities and multiple asset classes with billions in developments underway. He's also the Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestselling author of The Gift of Failure, and he's known for blending high-performance wellness with long-term wealth creation. Ari, welcome to the show.
Diane, thank you for that wonderful intro.
Well, we try.
It sounds better when you say it than when I think about it.
That's usually the way, isn't it? So one of the things that I've heard you say is that the future doesn't have to look like the past. So what was the first moment that you truly believed that you could build something massive, not just successful, but generational?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. And I don't know if it was an aha moment, quite frankly. There have been a lot of aha moments over the years, but building something massive and generational, I found that focusing on something very small, like laying a brick, like if you set out to build a wall, building a brick and laying a brick impeccably over and over and over again, the wall takes care of itself. Okay. And so, yes, did I have delusions of grandeur? Yes. Did I think that early on that I could, build a multi-billion-dollar or trillion-dollar platform? Yes, but those were words. Like those were, I'm going to be a billionaire one day, working at Johnny Rockets, flipping burgers, making $2 an hour. So I have had a healthy dose of madness and impracticability early on, absolutely. But it wasn't really like that when it started to happen, because the only things that you become very aware of when you're building something of this magnitude are the failures, are the pain points and the roadblocks that hit. Those become the visceral experiences. And, and I hate to say it, but, celebrating the wins I've been really, really bad at, because by the time we got to the finish line and something, became this massive accomplishment, finishing a 600,000 square foot industrial facility as an example, the amount of pain and suffering that it took to get to that point was almost like it was anticlimactic. It was like, God, fuck, it's okay. It's done.
Thank God it's over.
Yeah. Thank God it's over. Like, let's work on the next thing, where like the life got sucked out of it along the way because it was delayed, and this thing fell through, and this took longer. It was supposed to close on this day. Then it closed a month later. Then it was supposed to whatever. And an investor came in, they fell out. And I'm not complaining about it as more as I'm just explaining the circumstance, because there's also seasons in how these things happen too. So the early years, the seasons of life of the 20 to 40-year-old season is so much about education and experimenting and experiencing. And if you're lucky enough, learning a couple things. But in the human lifespan over thousands of years, harvest season is between 42 to 63 years old on average. So as a 43-year-old CEO and the father of three, I'm just now walking into the harvest season from the emotional satiating part of it. So even though there have been accolades, yes, that I'm very fortunate, I feel very privileged, to do the things that I've done, to have the investors that we have, the public pension plans, the insurance companies, serving firefighters and teachers has been an enormous privilege. But I feel like I'm just getting my legs underneath me now, to where when something happens, we donate 11 acres to the city of Kyle, which is just south of Austin, to build a new elementary school. And it's a 318-acre site. And look, Diane, I'm a nobody from nowhere. Like, I don't have any special talents. Like, I went to 2 community colleges to barely get into A&M. Like, I had a horrible speech impediment growing up. Like, I didn't think that I could be good at anything, honestly, other than reading Think and Grow Rich at one point, and then all of a sudden going, oh my God, I could be rich, but not like getting it into my body and registering that I could build this generational platform. Like, those, I didn't think about those things, but the relentlessness and the persistence around wanting to be seen, wanting to grow, wanting to contribute was insatiable, is the only word that I can have. And lifting my head up at one point, after excavating all my emotions, after going through thousands of hours of meditation, spending 5 7-day seminars with Dr. Joe Dispenza last year alone. I'm going to another one on Friday. I'm just now starting to take inventory of those things. I know that's a very verbose answer to your question. I don't know if it answers it, but
No, I hear you. Setting goals is something that a lot of entrepreneurs do, but they don't necessarily reach them. And, you talk about laying one brick at a time, which sort of speaks to focus and process. But like, was there an internal narrative that you found you had to rewrite along the
oh,
way?
totally. Oh, totally. That I can't do it. It's riddled with self-doubt. I had every doctor that I ever met telling me I have some sort of ailment, some sort of anxiety, some sort of depression, giving me a pill for this, a pill for that. And, several years ago, I did the enough. I'm not doing this shit. Like, this is not in the internal excavation. I've always considered myself a pretty spiritual person. Like, I grew up in a household that believed in all the major religions. Like, we talked about, the similarities between the different religions and the different cultures, and being half Iranian, half German, growing up in Texas. And so I've been very aware of the esoteric world since I was a young kid, and wanting to have a certain amount of meaning. And then when I started to audit my internal dialogue, it wasn't pretty. It was mean. It was abusive. It was sad. It was angry. And my meditation practice gave me a moment to make the unconscious conscious, if that makes sense, or starting to become conscious of those unconscious things, of sitting myself, being in the river, and catching myself and, holy shit, whoa, what did you just say to yourself? Like, whoa, like, where did that come from? So-and-so said what? And all of a sudden I'm upset or angry, and then asking, like, why? Like, holy shit, like, they just asked if you wanted some French fries. Like, and then this revolution, and starting to stop the dialogue and ask it a question. And they call it metacognition, where you think about what you think about. And in my health and wellness journey, helped me get into that dialogue, because I found that a lot of the issues that were diagnosed as emotional or psychological were in fact physiological. Eating too much sugar, eating a lot of processed food, not moving your body, having super low testosterone, having very high estrogen, like not eating certain, like, when all of those things started to calibrate through nutraceuticals, through clean eating, to moving my body, to calming my nervous system with meditation, all of a sudden this whole new world evolved, saying, oh, this is what's actually going on. And that transcendence, for lack of a better word, went into the business because the business was an extension of me. And I saw those conversations got better, relationships deepened, deals that were struggling, starting to see the resistance between parties. Was there ego in that? Was it really about the deal? You need to call this investor and tell them, hey, this is behind, or that's unacceptable for a boundary. But none of that was possible for me when I didn't know that I felt like shit. Like I didn't know how bad I really felt until I started to feel better. And those things, as I said, that I thought or was told were psychological or emotional, I would say 90% of them were actually biological and physiological, that once they started to correct, I started to feel better.
No, it's interesting because I mean, we all have that inner voice that isn't always our best friend, and then you have all of the external noise that comes at us from whether it's
Totally.
expectations or jealousy or
Totally.
whatever is around us, and everyone obviously has their own goals and motivations, and then if we're not in a place where we can really exude that confidence in that direction, then people don't follow us, and it's like this domino effect.
And it's a chicken and the egg too, because I'm a big believer that life is a mirror, and really digesting that statement brings a radical level of accountability. So if I'm having a conversation and guessing, oh well, she said this to me and that was really whatever, it's a very different experience to say, what in me is personifying her to say that to me.
Mm. Yeah.
And that dialogue, again, it's not perfect. I am not an expert in this, but I am a regular guy living a full life, and screwing it up all along the way. As you said, I wrote a whole book about failure. But I can tell you, in my journey, stopping for a second to ask myself, why is that triggering me? Like, why am I upset about that? Why am I sad about that? Why am I, why? And somehow for me, that pattern interrupt of just stopping and not letting you, this is how I feel. Like, why?
What's behind that,
Like,
right?
what's like, why do I feel that way? Like, I live in a country with liberties. I have my needs met. Like, I have a car, I have a house, I have my health, I have like, how could I be this fucking upset? And this, like, oh, poor me. Like, that's bullshit for me. And so pulling out of that abyss by stopping it, constantly asking those questions, I was able to go back in and start to write that software with a narrative, with an emotional software, with elevated emotions that I wanted, instead of just being a victim or just letting it run on autopilot and letting the prisoners run the yard.
Mm-hmm.
And that process was through a series of things, starting with physiological health, and getting my hormones right and eating the right stuff. And I mean, you have to go out of your way in this world not to know what to eat and what to do for your health. I mean, you have to literally try to not know the right stuff to do. And I know you can be vegan or this and whatever, fine. But there is some basic biological things that the human body needs and requires. And we can argue about semantics, but 80% of it is exactly the same. Getting that right in a world that is literally made attention an algorithm, literally, of how
So true.
companies take your attention. It's literally a science to stop and close your eyes with restful wakefulness. Let your actual brain waves calm. And I've watched this on scans, on thousands and thousands of brain scans, of seeing this is what anxiety looks like. This is what a heart looks like. No human, no story, just the heartbeat, the heart rate variability. That's anxiety. That's depression. And then with the work saying that's joy. That's gratitude.
And that's
That's love.
important because we attract the same way that some people, not to go down a rabbit hole, but some people tend to attract relationships that are not the best ones for them. And that can be personal or
Everybody
it can be
attracts what they
business.
are.
It's like
You
we are attracting something,
you
right? So if you're
attract what you are. And I know that sounds super corny, and I hear myself saying it, it sounds whatever, but you really truly do in every way, shape, or form. But if you're not willing to take, as like radical responsibility and not fault, fault is a very different word. May not be your fault, but it's your fucking problem. And so what do and there was a point in my life where I was like, I'm like, enough's enough. Like I'm not doing that anymore. Or at least I'm going to make a valiant effort. I spent all this time building a big business. I'm not going to spend all this time to build a life. Like, what? How stupid is that? Like,
very well said, very
and
well said.
so, I spend, you spend 40 hours a week at a job, but don't spend 1 hour a day taking an inventory of you. Like, how
Yeah.
dumb is that? Like, for me, I'm saying, not to anybody can do what they want to do, but that's what I said to myself in the mirror. I
Yeah,
was like,
no,
bro, you're,
absolutely. I mean, I think it was Stephen Covey that said that no one ever gets to their deathbed and wishes that they'd spent more time in the office.
yeah,
So I mean, it is a balance, right?
yeah,
But back to
it is.
kind of segueing back to business there for a moment. But I know that you started investing in law school or during law school, and most people at that stage are just buried in debt, not building portfolios. So what do you feel that you saw at that time that maybe others didn't, and what are some of the calculated risks that you took?
You
Maybe
mean
others.
aside from recklessness,
It
madness, and
could have been
insanity?
recklessness. You tell me.
Yeah, no, it totally was. I mean, it was not risk adjusted returns. It wasn't risk management. Like, it was um, just in a very exuberant young man that was wanting to go do something that mattered, that I felt like was gonna matter. And it was at a time when the markets were just going up, 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 and you know tends to make people look a lot smarter than they are. This is 2006, 2007. You know what happened in 2008, and I used my scholarship money and bought this lot, and had so much naivete that I didn't even know what I didn't know. Like, and somehow, dumb enough, it worked. And success, in my experience, taught me nothing, especially when it came easy, especially when I bought this lot, I found a guy, we built it, we made money. We bought the second one, built it, made money. And then the world came to an end. But until I started to realize that that was a function of something that wasn't my skill, wasn't my analysis or lack of analysis, until I started to really, really, really get kicked in the teeth from a business standpoint, I didn't take the moment to lay on my back long enough to figure out what the fuck happened and what is going on. But those lessons were all extrapolated through soul crushing moments that I talk about in the book, my entertainment company, my just a bunch of things that happened, and thank God they did. But all of those lessons and those evolutions in my experience come from desperation, not from inspiration. And those moments were, because when you're desperate enough, or when I've been desperate enough, I change.
Everyone is listening to the same podcast about the latest AI breakthroughs. Business owners are playing around with ChatGPT, expecting magic, but seeing zero impact on their bottom line. Here's the reality: tech alone is not enough. Features get copied in days and hype cycles burn fast. To actually grow, brands don't just need better tools, they need systems to scale. That's why the Alchemy firm exists. They don't just implement AI, they build go-to-market infrastructure that professional services need to dominate. That includes people, process, and technology. For owners ready to move beyond the hype, the Alchemy firm is offering a free fractional CMO AI agent customized specifically for their business. Stop playing with the tech, build the system. Visit alchemyfirm.ai today. That's alchemyfirm.ai. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you talk about your book, The Gift of Failure, and it really flips the narrative on setbacks. So, how do you emotionally process those high stakes losses? Because you talked about obviously what happened during the financial crisis,
Totally.
and that's a pretty high stake loss.
I
So what?
processed them horrifically bad until I didn't. I processed them like you would think, feeling super upset, going to drink alcohol, or I don't know, like whatever I was doing to numb whatever the issue, blaming other people, having, just an emotional pity party, all the things that you could assume that I would have done is what I did, until I realized that, first of all, that's not a good strategy to start with. It's not an intelligent strategy. And quite frankly, in studying the greatest achievers in the world, I was an English literature major in undergrad. I am an avid reader. I'm a reader. In fact, my first grade, my oldest daughter, when she was in first grade, when all the parents came to school for like, bring your parent to school and tell them what you do and what they do or whatever. And my daughter was so proud because she knew exactly. And other kids were like, I don't know what my dad does. I don't know what my mommy does. And whatever. And she was so proud of saying, I know what my dad does. And they're like, oh, okay. And we were there. I was like, you do? And I'm okay. And mind you, I'm an attorney at the time. I'm, whatever. And she goes, my dad is a reader.
That's adorable.
Yeah.
That's what
And
he
the
does. He
teacher
gets
was like,
paid to read.
well, because going to do this thing. And I looked at the teacher, was like, don't you dare change that
Right?
narrative. Like, and she was like, how do you know that your dad does reading or something? She's like, well, every time I ask him to play, he's reading a book and he says, no, I'm working.
That's funny. Oh, kids are just so honest, aren't
They're
they?
so good. So good. But, I digress. But, in all of this stuff, my definition after studying the greatest achievers in the world, which is my hobby of anything from sports to history to politics to health, if you're the best, I like you, or I want to study, or I shouldn't say I like your process. I want to learn from you. I want to see what it takes. And the thing that is similar about all of them is they fail big. The bigger they go, the bigger they fail, period. So I got to thinking, I was like, if they all fail that fucking big, how can they? So let's rethink about this. Well, failure is actually learning how to win. If you take the time to have some introspection. But that's literally my definition for failure now, learning how to win. So when I fail, inevitably in something, a dialogue, a conversation, I had a podcast this morning that I got on, and boy, we got off on the wrong foot. It was a couple things happening, and we canceled it even before we started, and for 30 minutes afterwards, I got to thinking, I was like, wow, that was, that didn't go the way that I thought. And I thought through kind of things I said, I thought through some things that he said, but now my process has come through to saying, not, this is a jab at my self-worth. This is not a reflection of my identity. This is not, in fact, if it is, it should be a reflection of introspection. The reflection should be that I was able to say something. I was able to, see later that I had an emotional response. Some trigger was there, some button was pushed, and then start to look at it in a way to see, what can I learn from this? And like I said, I'm explaining it very eloquently. I do not do it this prettily. This is not a pretty process always. Sometimes it is. But that is what I aspire to do. I aspire to look at it and say, what went wrong? What went right? Let's try to keep it fair. Like, not, when something goes wrong, especially in a business where you buy a deal, not everything went wrong. Enough went wrong maybe to lose money, but maybe you met someone, maybe something here, maybe you got a couple leases right, maybe the financing was fucked up, maybe interest rates went up, maybe it was an investor issue. But figuring out what went right, what went wrong, how to not repeat the things that went wrong in a similar situation, and how to repeat and compound on the things that went right. But that moment of introspection, of getting hit, landing flat on your face, and having the courage to lay down for a while, stay on the ground, get kicked in the teeth,
Just
not
feel
flat, and lay there. and think about, how did I get here? Don't get up so quickly. Don't be so jolty. Don't start making excuses. Don't running through the narrative. Take a moment to audit the situation, think about it, and then slowly get back up. Cautiously optimistic. Get up. Is there another dragon going to come eat my head off? Is there going to be a hurricane? What's going on? And I think repeating that process over and over again for me has come to be this experience of life. And the more that I've aspired to look at it through this lens, and continuing to fail miserably at times, admittedly, I find it to be a much more fulfilling and meaningful life.
But I'm hearing a theme of, one of introspection and the other of analysis. So when something goes wrong, figure out the lesson from it. And, it's interesting to me because I talk to people who are, I would call them entrepreneurs. I talk to others who are operators. They're like those multi-exit. It's a system, and they understand success. They have fallen flat on their face multiple times. I think, Mark Cuban's famous quote, "You only have to get it right once." But so talk to me about that, whether it's a mindset, a process, a system. What is it that distinguishes an operator from an entrepreneur?
Well, operator, I think entrepreneurs, as a general rule, have a series of characteristics about them. And it's why entrepreneurs, as a general rule, make very bad CEOs. And the reason why is, to be a great entrepreneur, a great founder, you have to have grit. You have to be bold. You have to have vision. You have to have resilience. You have to be like a decathlete of business, like pretty good at a lot of marketing, sales, a little bit of legal, a little bit of whatever. All of those traits make a terrible CEO, make a terrible operator. A CEO is calm. They train people. They design systems. They have repeatable if-then, type scenarios. And those character traits, either an entrepreneur has to fundamentally evolve as a human being into that role. And it's why most entrepreneurs and founders fail as CEOs or get ousted from their companies. It's because it's not the same person that's needed to have the explosion as it is to run the machine. And so, very few times in business history have we seen people make that transition in a meaningful way. Jeff Bezos has done it incredibly well. Mark Zuckerberg has done it incredibly well. But you look at the Steve Jobses of the world, you look at, even Elon Musk early on had all this trouble with PayPal and, almost failed, and then had to change into this other thing. And I think personal development is so critical if you're going to get to that next place, because the strategies that got you to inception, or got you your first round of investors, or got you into the first deal, that is not the person that is needed to scale into a mature enterprise level company.
And are there signs, like when you look at someone who is, maybe whether they're an entrepreneur or whether they're an operator, but what's that point in a company where you need that operator mindset, and it's either time to bring in someone new or for the entrepreneur to really double down and transition?
Very hard. I mean, you have to see, you can't see the picture when you're in the frame. And this, for me, myself, has been a huge part of my own journey, and I'm lucky enough that, my chief of staff is my best friend since we were in 7th grade. And we are polar opposites in just about every way. You'll like him a lot more than you like me. He's very much a peacemaker, and I'm very much a bold enthusiast. And so having somebody that you trust and knows you so well to tell you hard truths in certain instances, or to hold things from you that you shouldn't be privy to in a good way, is very powerful. And having people that can tell you things and talk with you and you not bite their heads off in certain ways is very important. But this has been a tough journey for me personally, and I'm sure you can find people way better than me to explain the differences of it. But I can tell you, at the scale of this firm, with billions of dollars in our pipeline and development, I have spent a profound amount of my time surrounding myself with people that have very, very different skill sets, and it has been a very bitter pill to swallow, even though knowing that you want to do it, you need it. but going against the fundamental architecture of maybe who you are and having to evolve it, his profound growing pains. But as they have evolved, I can speak for myself. Again, the fulfillment and the gratification of them is really beautiful. But it is one of the more difficult things, if not the most difficult thing I've had to do as a business person per se.
Yeah, I get that. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are used to being the smartest one in the room about just about everything.
Yeah,
And
and
being an
that doesn't.
operator, you got to recognize that's not necessarily the best thing for your business.
Yeah, and operators and the type of operators that you're talking about, and not to one dimensionalize it, but are very, have a very engineering type mindset in certain ways. They understand systems and process and the steps that it gets to get to places. And, as a, in my mindset that, of course, I'd like to believe I can kind of do that stuff a little bit, but that's not my highest and best use, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And coming to terms with this being team sports and a company being a team of different types of skill sets and viewpoints and all, rowing in the same direction. But, you look at basketball as an example, it's such an easy analogy. It's like, your center is not your shooting guard, like it's their, Shaq is not Kobe Bryant. Like they're, but if you didn't have Shaq there in center, he's not going to be open for the shots that he's up, or, whatever analogy you want to use.
Yeah.
You use the insanity of Dennis Rodman and, the genius of Michael Jordan. Like they're just different, and you have to have them for the team to win championships. And as a founder and an entrepreneur, somehow you have this belief that you have to do it all. And that's not how you scale. And it's not a good strategy. It's not intelligent. The delegation part is where the genius, the magic, and in high level contribution actually happens.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree with you completely. So, when you're working with high income earners who are trying to preserve and grow their wealth, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see them making?
I think, I think that confusing their brilliance in their job with being brilliant at investing. Investing in a certain way. And I'm not a financial advisor. I run a real estate private equity business. So, I have clients of mine that run portfolios and asset allocation and non-correlated investments across blah, blah, blah. And so I think because when you're really good at something and you make a lot of money, a lot of times it breeds a level of arrogance. And I'm very guilty of this in my own regard as well. And so sometimes you haphazardly make those decisions or say no to something a little too abruptly or say yes to it a little bit too quickly. But the high earners that I know the best, that have done the well over time, bring in a great financial advisor. They bring in a great CPA. They bring in and not unlike great entrepreneurs, is bringing in the people that are experts in those fields and making more calculated decisions when you realize that's not your exact skill set. Like if I cut my arm right now and it's bleeding, I'm not going to go stitch it up myself. I'm going to go get a doctor to stitch it up. But sometimes business and investing can be a little bit more deceptive in that health critical scare, to go see your doctor. But sometimes when you're good at making money in your day job, you somehow think that you're good at investing because it's both money, but when you cut your arm, to go see a doctor. Yeah. And it's taking that mindset can be incredibly helpful or incredibly dangerous, especially if I try to stitch my arm myself.
Absolutely. So for entrepreneurs who are listening right now who maybe don't yet have that operator level mindset, what's one habit that you feel they should adopt immediately, and what's one
I think you need to figure out what you're great at, and if you don't know, go ask 3 of the people that you're closest to. The 3 people that you're the closest to, and have them tell you what are you brilliant at, and have the courage to say what are you not good at. And if they love you enough, they'll tell you, and go find that person. I think for a lot of entrepreneurs is like a brilliant CPA as an example, because the CPA typically is, their mindset, their personality, their reality, the way they look at things is very different than the exuberance of an entrepreneur that's a lifetime salesperson that's outwardly focused. And I think those 2 differing pieces will start to illuminate where the pitfalls could be.
Makes sense. And if you could go back to the version of yourself flipping burgers and delivering pizzas, knowing what you know now, what would you tell young Ari?
Well, I wouldn't tell him anything because overcoming is the becoming is really the truth. But I would say to him, if I could, I just kind of whisper in his ear, no matter what, just keep going. Just keep going. No matter what, keep going, keep going, keep going. I might tell him, try to enjoy the process and trust the process a little bit more and don't be so fucking stressed all the time. But aside from that, I would hopefully love him enough to let him fall and let him fail and let him get back up, because that's where the magic is.
Sometimes it's the school of hard knocks, isn't it?
Always is. Always is.
Absolutely. Well, Ari, it's really been a pleasure having this conversation with you. How can people find you? Tell us a little bit more about your business. How can they reach out?
Sure. Yeah, you can go to rastegarcapital.com. You can put it in the notes. You can go to @Rastegar on Instagram or @Rastegar Property on Instagram to see what we do in our investment business. We service accredited investors, high net worth investors, and all sorts of real estate investing, including public pension plans, insurance companies, etc. You can Google my name and go to LinkedIn, or the team works really hard to put out meaningful content and things to help people along the way. But you can look up Rastegar Capital. You can go to our site. You can look up my name and find us through the outlets. Reach out. There's people on our team that are very open-hearted and truly want to help the people that they're around and ask questions. They're happy to answer them. And if we can help you, we'll tell you. And if we can't, we'll tell you that too.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Ari.
Thanks, Diane.